Well, until we are set, congratulations, Annie. Okay. Welcome, everybody, to our final panel of the conference with the title Beyond Militarization and Green Capitalism, Struggles for a Socio-Ecological Transformation. I'm really happy that we are still so many people here at the conference, which is not usual, but speaks for the conference, for the themes, for the organization. So before we start with the panel itself, let me introduce you, the panelists. I will start on my far right, on your far left, with Mario Candeias. He's a political scientist between 2013 and I think 2023. You were the director of the Institute for the Analysis of Society at the Rosa-Luxemburg Foundation here in Berlin. You are the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the journal Luxemburg, and you are a research fellow for socialist transformation research, left-wing strategies, and parties at the Rosa-Luxemburg Foundation. Welcome, and we're really happy to have you here. Next to Mario, we have Julia Kaiser. She's a sociologist. She's a researcher at the University of Leipzig at the Global and European Studies Institute. And you're working in your PhD on working class environmentalism in industrial decline, the movement for democratic conversion around the Collettivo di Fabria GKN. We have heard a lot about it, and hopefully we get more insights from you. Welcome, Julia. Next to Julia, we have Hans-Jürgen Urban. Hans-Jürgen is a German trade unionist and sociologist. You have an honorary professorship at the Friedrich Schiller University in Jena. And you're also the managing executive member of the IG Metall since 2007. Yeah, okay, that is correct. And there you're responsible for the social policy, health protection, work organization topics. But you also have published many different articles concerning sustainable work, ecological economy, democracy and economy, and of course, transformation in terms of ecology and labor. A warm welcome. We are happy to have you here. To my close left, we have Edlira Xhafa, I'm sorry. You hold a PhD in labor studies, and since 2000, you're engaged with national trade unions in many different countries, as I just learned, in Albania, the Philippines, Bangladesh, Cambodia, and Myanmar. I probably forgot some, but you can tell us a little bit more about that when we are in the discussion. And you worked and collaborated with many different international trade unions and labor organizations, for example, the Education International, Public Service International, or the ILO. And you're currently the executive director of the Global University Online Academy. Welcome. And last but not least, we have Patrick Bond. He is a professor at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. You are a sociologist, a political economist, and as I just read, also you're engaged in the field of political ecology. And you have actually worked and taught in many different universities in South Korea, in the UK, in the US. And you published many very interesting articles concerning resource industries, resource conflicts in South Africa, and struggles for climate justice, uneven geographies, and the politics of connections, and post-coal politics in South Africa. We are really happy to have you here. And let me really briefly introduce myself. I'm Janina Puder. I'm the head of the chair of economic and labor sociology at the Brandenburg Technical University, Cottbus, Senftenberg, and there I hold a visiting professorship in socio-ecological transformation. So I'm really happy that we can have that final discussion. So far we've discussed in the many different workshops and the panels, questions concerning the crisis of the labor movement, crisis in terms of geopolitical tension, right-wing politics, rising authoritarian tendencies, deindustrialization, all these kinds of very awful things. But we also already touched a little bit on questions of labor environmentalism in terms of strategic perspectives. So we also, we already heard something about utopian views, alliances, and traditional struggles. We can kind of learn something from it. For today, this panel aims at discussing more the progressive forces in trade unions, movements, in academia and different regional contexts that kind of circles around the question of how can we gain or regain the capacity for progressive transformation in a regressive surrounding, so to say. And this is kind of like your role. We want to discuss how do we move forward from what we discussed here in this past 1.5 days. So we will start with a round of questions among the panel, and afterwards we have the time for discussing all together. So at any point you want to ask anything, write it down, and then we are gonna have a discussion all together. But to kind of like dive into the topic of the panel, let me start with you, Julia. You were part of the campaign Wir fahren zusammen. We have heard a little bit about it, which brought together the environmental activists, the union Verdi, and public transport workers to demand better working conditions and pay, while also advocating for a mobility transition. That strengthens public transport as an environmental friendly alternative to private cars. So in your view, what can we learn from Wir fahren zusammen or similar projects you're also engaged with the GKN case about building alliances between the labor and the climate movement, and what were the conditions that initially motivated this alliance? How did it actually come into place, and what are the struggles, which were the problems with it?
Hello? Hello, can you hear me? Yes, okay. Okay, thank you, Janina, and thanks for having me here. I think I have a bit of a difficult role and maybe a bit contradictory, because on that conference I heard very oftenly, and I do understand, that we have those two examples which I should now discuss, which are always discussed and which somehow seem to be the only connecting points when talking about positive examples of working class environmentalism. And we shall not focus only on those examples in our debates. And I absolutely agree, because I think like labor environmentalism, as this conference showed, must study also the conditions under which working class environmentalism does not appear, must study different contexts, must study different perceptions of different workers in different workplaces, and also non-waged work, and so on and so forth. Still, and this is how I decided to also do my PhD on working class environmentalism, I think it's worth studying exactly what you just asked. So what exactly happened in those movements, how were they initiated, how can we also maybe study the subjective factor and political factors through to which those alliances came into being, because otherwise, of course, we can always study a lot, but nor as political beings initiate something, nor can try to describe under which conditions it could work. So we drive together. Most of you will know that alliances brought bus drivers and climate activists together, and there were those two goals of better working conditions and also better funding on public transport, but in a very, very in concrete sense, actually. And yeah, in the first campaign there were 20 alliances around Germany. In the second campaign there were already 50 alliances, and now there are alliances in Austria, also in Italy, as I learned, and maybe in other places of the world, which I probably do not know. And I think I have some learnings. I thought about some which could be interesting for other contexts and other countries. I don't know whether all of you know how that campaign was initiated, and it was actually a letter by some probably 18, 20-year-old climate activists, which they wrote as part of Fridays for Future to all DGB trade unionists. So they wrote that letter and said, let us, in a very Jane McAlevey approach, let us come together and talk about the 90% of common interests which we maybe could have. And let's go to a table and talk about those common interests and find out whether we could establish any kind of common approach. And this is how some Fridays for Future activists, I was active in Leipzig, but not in that very central part of the campaign. And then, like, very little, but some trade unionists, especially from this bus sector, came and said, okay, we are in front of a collective bargaining round. We are interested in campaigning with you because, as you could imagine, we need also discursive power resources. So we need you, because if bus drivers strike, the public is not always in favor. So we need you. And also as a bus driver union, we are, and we think that also our members could be interested in doing a campaign together. So this is how this committee of a current campaign came into place. And I think this is a very easy and quite also like you could shift that approach to another context. Everyone could do it. We don't have a big Fridays for Future movement at the moment, but still, if we talk about alliances, that asking for thinking about common interests and common campaigns is a very concrete learning. And since years, I hope that there's anyone coming up with an idea for another sector, because I think we could practice those alliances in a lot of other sectors. Maybe the second learning is this of international perception. I think that we talked a lot about that campaign, and also in our context, and all of you who wrote about those alliances and so on helped other activists and trade unionists to try to build up such a campaign, for example, in other countries. So it is worth it to really describe also some campaigns in very concrete matters and try to find methods, which we also learned from the trade unionists, actually, to find methods how organizing can be really practically described and done, because also, class formation sometimes just arises, but oftenly also people think about it, how to bring workers, different parts of the working class together. And maybe one thing regarding difficulties, I think, and Hans Rackwitz actually just talked about it, and he also wrote a lot of very interesting texts about it. I think it would be interesting to discuss how the political vision of such an alliance could become much more concrete, because this actually was a collective bargaining round which was a bit politicized, and actually the collective bargaining round got a bit stronger, which is the same in Austria. They told us it was the first strike since, let me lie, I don't know, 15 years or something in that private bus sector. And all the activists told me this is due to activists from the outside, which often have a very difficult role, but in that case they help building up working class power in a very difficult and migrant part of the working class, oftenly in the Austrian private bus sector, sorry. So that worked out, and we can also help the trade unionist world to become maybe a bit more I don't know, radical, but we have not had any concrete vision of a Verkehrswende, of a mobility transition. And I think to work on alliances and projects which could connect the demand side for conversion projects. We discussed a lot about that. I think if we have conversion projects, the question is always which part of state-owned companies or whatever could be the buyer for new products. And of course also connecting different struggles in that way and developing a much broader vision through which also civil society could somehow become part of such a struggle. That would be interesting, because what we did was not a big political campaign, it was a politicized bargaining round, I would argue. Shall I stop here?
However you like. If you have more to say, you have the time.
I mean, I could say some learnings from the GKN struggle, but we could also go on.
If you want to keep that in mind for the discussion, but please get back to that. Because I just had the thought that it really fits very well with my next question, which is addressed to you, Hans-Jürgen, because now we are talking about alliances between Fridays for Future or similar groups and Verdi. But you, as a representative of the IG Metall, the German largest industrial union, you have been campaigning within the union for an industrial development model that is both socially and ecological sustainable. Yeah, for example, I think it was 2019, but after that you did different struggles again. You had a union-organized major demonstration which was calling for a fair transition that demanded that workers and union must have an active role in shaping the transformation process. And with increasing militarization and the threat of deindustrialization, it's kind of becomes like a challenge also within probably the IG Metall, how you deal with all these different political aspects that is part of your work. So for one part of my question, I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the forces within IG Metall are pushing to advocate a social and ecological transformation rather than, for example, militarization and economic nationalism, and what are current conflicts and opportunities that you observe in these internal union debates as far as you can share with us. And Julia just said when there was the building of the alliance, the bus drivers came to you and they said, we need you. And do the IG Metall need the Fridays for Futures and co?
Yes. So let me please first thank you for inviting me to the conference and to speak here at the panel. Unfortunately, I was not able to join the conference yesterday and today, and so maybe I have no new ideas to offer to you. And in order not to speak too long, I will look at my notes and try to keep it short. First of all, I want to say that I very much share the general view of the conference and the approach of environmental labor studies. I strongly believe that we need to have more coalitions and we have to have more intensive cooperations and debates between labor unions and between environmental movements. From my perspective, there's no doubt that the unions have to be a key actor in socio-ecological transformation. Our members and we as an organization, as unions, as organizations, have huge interests in stopping the ecological destruction and in participate to a big and strong movement that keeps that to an end. But by defining us as a part of the environmental movement, we must take into account a special feature that is deeply rooted in the basic of the capitalist economy. because our members are affected in two different ways. First, of course, as employees. They are employees whose social existence, whose living is deeply connected and deeply dependent on this production process that is so destructive to nature. And at the same time, of course, we are affected as citizens and human beings by the ecological costs of the industry in which we are working on. So it is this double role, this double risk situation that defines the situation of industrial workers and their unions, and that's not an easy situation. So cooperation with the environmental movement, especially with Fridays, is not only possible, it happened very often in the last years. And I think this is especially because Fridays has considered social and ecological issues together from the beginning on. Sometimes we combine this issue with the issue of militarization and with the danger for a union as IG Metall to try to replace the jobs we are losing in the automotive and the steel industry in the hope we can find them new in the arm production industry. But I want to make clear that is not our aim. We don't believe and we don't want it. We don't want it because of political reasons, and it would be hopeless because even if we increase the spending for war production, it will never reach the size that the steel industry and the automotive industry had. So it's an illusion. It would be an illusion too. And after all, we had to go more deeply in the issue of war and freedom today. And to make it short, I think we live in a world of neo-imperialist conflicts. And also the West, of course, the NATO is a player in this game with imperialist interests and aggressive strategies. And I think it's not that easy for a left-wing movement to define their own role in this world and in this conflict. Who's the enemy? Who deserves our solidarity? It's not that easy to answer those questions. But clear is we have to fight the militarization of economy, of society, of policy. And because of that, I think, yes, we have another reason to try to make coalitions, alliance with another movement. It's the peace movement. And I think there were a lot of things to say. I try to make it short and come to another point. What to do? A well-known question in the left-wing movement. Looking at the joint political activities we had, we are once again faced with a difficult contradiction. On the one hand, I share the view of many scholars working on environmental labor studies that the real solution, that the real overcoming of the ecological problem is probably only possible outside the current capitalistic mode of production. On the other hand, we can't wait until the capitalism leaves the historical stage. So we have to act under the circumstances we have, and therefore we have to try to make ensure that the environmental pollution is reduced as much as possible. And this is the core of decarbonization. It's the core of decarbonization of the industrial production. And this will lead, we see it, this will lead to conflicts and tensions between the ecological and the social dimension of the transformation. Currently, we have to note that the ecological transformation process is in danger, or better to say, stopped. Not least because the social component of this transformation is completely lost. For us, this means that we must endure the conflicts between the interests of our members, interests in terms of jobs and incomes, and the interest of the nature in terms of sustainability. So trade unions as IG Metall will therefore always be demanding partners in such alliances with radical environmental organizations and movements, and of course actors who overlook this contradiction are difficult partners for us, honestly spoken. And I think we have to have a debate on this situation. So after an intensive debate inside, an internal debate, IG Metall has decided not to oppose ecological transformation as a veto player, but to drive it forward. We know that this is a risky path for us, and it is combined with a lot of tensions between the organization and the membership and the member base. But I think there's no other alternative. So for that, surely we need new alliances and closer cooperation between labor and environmental movement. But it is, to say it again, it is easier said than done, because finding common ground is not a conflict-free process. The conflicts of interests can only be addressed by honest debates and new ideas to find that common ground. However, in my opinion, there's no way around that dialogue. To be more concrete, such an ecological partnership, social ecological partnership, must prove itself in theory, of course, but also in political practice. The joint fight for the steel industry could be, in my opinion, a good example for that. The steel industry contributes significantly to the greenhouse gases in its current form. It's not sustainable. That is not easy to say for a unionist from an industrial organization. On the other hand, steel is needed in sustainable economic. No energy without steel, no public transport without steel, no schools, no universities, no hospitals without steels. There is a common interest here in converting steel production from coal-based to another mode of production, and this can reduce CO2 emission by over 90%. Here we can see, in my opinion, here we can see a set of common interests, and this intersection should form the basic for joint political struggle. I said it's not easy and it's not without conflicts, but it's possible. And the existing alliances of the past and the currently joint struggles between unions and environmental activists are encouraging. I strongly believe that we need more initiatives to enable the direct dialogues between those affected by the process of transformation and actors in the environmental movement. The ongoing process of transformation in many industrial sectors offers not only problems but opportunities of cooperation. And it's the job of both, of labor unions as well as environmental union groups and activists, to work toward a common agenda for just transition. And it is within the capitalistic mode of production for a while and hopefully beyond it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans-Jürgen. You were talking about a possible sector that could be a place where you can come together with the Fridays for Future, other groups. the steel industry, but there's also another very important industry, and I want to address this question to Mario, because the automobile industry, and we're kind of like talking about mobility, and these are all very important sectors that are kind of like a joint playing field that we can talk about the transformation. But for the automobile industry, it's a very important pillar of the German economy, but it is currently under enormous pressure due to the declining competitiveness and the style transformation process. And the Volkswagen plant in Osnabrück is threatened with closure by 2027. It would be like the second kind of transformation in that area, because there was a similar fate that befell the manufacturer Kalman in 2009, if I remember correctly. And this threat of closing this plant in Osnabrück, which would have serious consequences for suppliers in the region. There's even a discussion about replacing this facility with Rheinmetall production sites. So this is kind of like the bridge where you two have probably a common point. But the campaign to convert the Volkswagen Osnabrück facility into a plan for public transport production can be understood as an effort to link industrial policy, transformation, and job security in these terms you just raised before, Julia and Hans-Jürgen. But you know a little bit your way around that campaign, Mario, as I understood, and I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about which challenges this campaign actually faces, and how is it perceived by the union, by the work council, and by the workers, of course, themselves. Do you observe some form of moral economy among the workers, which makes them opt for socially useful rather than arms production? And what lessons can be drawn from the experience for developing a progressive transformation strategy? So this kind of like a lot of large questions, but I'm pretty confident you can give us some insightful thoughts on that.
Yes, thanks a lot. I will start a little bit more general, because everybody knows that transformation of mobility systems requires a lot of man and women power. In order to achieve the climate goals, we have to shift from the motorized individual transport to public transport, also to bicycles or pedestrians. This had been said for a long time, but it's not done, especially not in Germany. Even though the €9 ticket or the Deutschland ticket showed that the demand is there. So to achieve the necessary increase in passenger numbers by a factor of 2.5, we would not only need many more train drivers, bus drivers and so on, but we also need more trams, regional trains, e-buses, etc. We at Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung, we calculated this potential in a study a few years ago, that such a conversion would create up to 300,000 additional industrial jobs, not talking about the bus drivers. The overall potential would be even higher if we cut working hours to a so-called short full-time for everyone. This would give us a potential of up to 400,000 additional jobs. A big if, of course. The car companies will not voluntarily take part in this transformation. They ride the horse until it's dead, or as long as capital invested produces high profits. Therefore, this raises also the question of ownership again and again. The IG Metall has made various declarations for fair mobility together with our environmental and social associations. You find there even a requirement for a minimum value-added rate of 50% in Germany, when purchasing vehicles for public transport companies. So this could mean also an entry into conversion, because so far employment has been cut in these areas that are so important, for instance, as Alstom, as well as Daimler Buses or Waggonbau in Görlitz, where now Rheinmetall has entered or taken over the factory. Unfortunately, the red-green government did nothing in this direction. Nor did the IG Metall follow up the right demand with a real practice. In the end, it mostly treated conversion as a non-realistic and as non-realistic, and did not develop any proactive practice. I'm sorry that my criticism hits always the wrong person, as Hans-Jürgen always has spoken also in favor of such policies, but not the union itself. And there's no shortage of good starting points. Threatening factory closures are numerous. The youngest one is Osnabrück, as you mentioned. VW has decided to close the plant. At the time of the decision, this affected around 2,500 workers. Now it's slightly fewer. If you don't want to rely on the vague option of a possible cooperation between Rheinmetall and Volkswagen in the production of military vehicles, you have to think about alternatives. And the Osnabrück factory already has a suitable project. The small, smart Pluto electric bus, a vehicle for call service and public transport. For 6 passengers, the routes are optimally calculated and followed by an AI. Back in 2019, the product was developed in just 10 months, and the workers were rightly proud of it. So we intervened with a little suggestion, not a campaign, that's too much. Others tried to do a campaign in Osnabrück, but we from Berlin, it would be kind of strange if we do a campaign in Osnabrück. But we entered with a suggestion from our circle working on auto industry conversion, where a lot of workers from even Volkswagen companies and others from climate activists and critical science discussed together. This vehicle was ultimately only built in a small number and with too much interior, but it doesn't have to be that way. The suggestion is that around 30 million people live in rural regions nationwide, only in Germany. So large buses with a fixed timetable and fixed stops are no longer up to date. In many places we have smaller village buses, community buses, and things like that, used as private or neighborhood help because there is no better solution. There's no public option. Pluto would be well suited for this, and the Rhein-Main Verkehrsverbund, one of the biggest, plans to supplement their public transport in the 2030s with on-demand shuttles and to expand it especially in rural areas. Certainly also something for Lower Saxony and beyond, even for a moderate export. So if you think, if only 60 vehicles were produced per day, the factory will be at full capacity. An annual production of about 15,000 would have to be sold globally, maybe at the price of around 60,000 euros. That's possible. But of course, you can't simply rely on the market. In order to ensure demand for the start, a municipal association of Lower Saxony municipalities, including Hanover and the 2 Hanseatic cities of Bremen and Hamburg, where vehicles from Osnabrück are already in use in these cities, that would be desirable. We are trying to do a study on the local needs and the will to organize such a municipal association. Such a transformation could and should be supported by funds from the regional state government and as well from funds from the federal government's infrastructure fund. Berlin is doing this a lot. Why not in Osnabrück? This requires the political will in the region and the appropriate public pressure to get things moving. On the side, if you don't have this pressure, nothing will be done. So we at RLS are clearly against the production of military equipment. But even if others are considering cooperation with Rheinmetall or are still hoping for some Porsche model to be produced in Osnabrück, it would be rational and necessary to also address alternatives, because neither of the options will secure the number of jobs that are right now there. In fact, Rheinmetall cancelled their offer 4 days ago. So you have to pursue several strategies in order to secure a future in the region. Not pursuing any alternative and just waiting and hoping would indeed be unrealistic. This seems to become more difficult in times of social regression when the pressure on the workers and the union are so high from the company, but even from inside, because they're losing workers to the far right. So there's a fear of losing more if you don't stick to what you're doing for so long and was successful for so long. But circumstances changed. So strategy has to change. So Osnabrück exemplifies the struggle over the form of conversion towards militarization and even partly deindustrialization, or towards a socio-ecological future where we also think about a different industrial base for an ecological economy. Maybe I'll stop at that point.
Thank you, Maria. I want to shift a little bit our focus of the discussion to have it a little bit complementary and kind of proceed with you, Edlira. You, as I already mentioned in your introduction, are heading the Global Labor University Online Academy. And I was wondering, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what that is, because not everyone was in the panel before that. But as far as I know, it's especially for the political education on question of labor and environment of workers, for which the Global Labor University Online Academy has also produced free online courses, such as Just and Green Labor's Ecological Question, which has reached, I think you told me, 4,000 people already? Yeah, well, you will tell me a little bit more about, but these people are watching these online webinars. I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about your work there, and from a global perspective, where do you see the main challenges and opportunities when it comes to the role of worker political education in building and sustaining movements for socio-ecological transformation? Where are progressive labor movements emerging? Do you witness anything of that manner for the potential for a larger political movement? And what can we learn from workers about rebuilding transnational solidarity and becoming offensive again?
Yeah, thank you very much. The Global Labor University is 21 years old, and the Online Academy is 11 years old. So in the grand scheme of things, not too old, but still, I think over the years, especially with the Online Academy, which is actually the part I'm working more, although I'm a graduate of the Global Labor University of the second generation, on that part, the idea was initially to provide free online courses to labor activists, trade unionists, wherever they are. And it did work on different issues, on questions of labor rights, question of global supply chains, and issues of development, how to regulate them, and so on. And of course, the course on labor and environment, but it's a wide range of courses that we offer. But we did realize over the years that the real learning happens when people come together. I guess we all could agree, even among ourselves, that had this conference been online, we would have had a completely different dynamic from actually meeting face-to-face with people and really discussing even beyond the presentations. And it is with that aim that actually we started right before COVID hit to set up a team of trainers that could get these online courses and use them in their own organizations. And we started with a course, Just and Green Labor's Ecological Question. And since then, there's been lots of interest, and we have expanded to actually nearly 200 trainers in about 50 countries. And these are activists embedded in the labor movement that basically take these online courses, for instance, the course on labor and environment, but also other courses, and build their study circles in their own organizations to try and contextualize this knowledge that is being produced at the global level at their local context. And I'm going to speak a bit more about that on a scripted text because I wanted to be within the 7 minutes that I was given. But I would be happy to respond to any other question, of course. So responding to your question actually about what is happening and where do we find inspiration, there is a short answer. In their famous Rekindling Socialist Imagination, Panich and Gindin quote a short lovers' dialogue in the 1990s novel Animal Dreams by Barbara Kingsolve. A woman asks her lover, "Did you ever dream you could fly?" He answers, "Not when I was sorting pecans all day." When she persisted and demanded, "Really though, didn't you fly even in your dreams?" He replies, "Only when I was close to fly in real life. Your dreams, what you hope for, and all that is not separate from your life. It grows right out of it." However, I was asked to speak for about 7 minutes, so I have a bit more time to try to move to real life and in our time and speak a bit more about our experience on the question of environment and the question of education. So one key challenge we face when it comes to worker education is its failure to develop alternative capacities. Instead, as Panich and Gindin have argued, what is often reproduced are practices which echoes capital and operate comfortably within the existing framework of power, whether it is about jointness in production, partnerships for competitiveness, alliances for jobs, worker representation in corporate boards, and so on. Many of these were discussed by the comrade from IG Metall yesterday. This model prioritizes the development of skills and knowledge of trade union leaders to enable them to perform their duties more efficiently, which in turn contributes to marginalization and minimization of worker political education in both form and content, as well as membership demobilization. In the case of US, Fletcher and Luce cite an AFL-CIO commissioned report which found that when it comes to worker education, issues of class, race, and a basic framework for understanding the political economy were seen as dangerous given the possibility of being branded as communists. As a result, most members have little or no ideological orientation that would link economics, government, and politics, and few can actually articulate any explanation for what has gone wrong, who is responsible, and what should be done about it. Lacking such an orientation, their substantial economic grievances do not lead them to progressive political conclusions we might actually expect, which is a bit of the discussion we had about in early morning about authoritarian regimes. Whereas this report is indeed cited to make an argument about the erratic and weak trade union response to the rise of right-wing authoritarianism in US, its application can easily be extended to the environmental crisis and well beyond the context of the US. Starting from the premise that, as Panich and Gindin have argued, any discussion of social transformation must begin with changing the role and nature of worker organizations and their potentials as sites of capacity building and democratization. Over the past years, the GLU has been heavily invested into providing spaces and models for permanent political education of workers. We have been experimenting with a blended model of worker education inspired by Freire's model of popular education and a long tradition of labor educators. This model combines free access to online courses, such as on labor and environment, with a global team of trainers, as I mentioned, and similar to Freire's praxis, that is reflection and action directed at the structures to be transformed, our model of worker education focuses on exposing power relations behind the various forms of exploitation of people and nature in a reiterative process of recognizing workers' experiential knowledge, collectively constructing new knowledge, and engaging in action on the ground. really more broadly, the aim of the model is to offer these possibilities for permanent political education for workers for social change, independent of funding possibilities. Indeed, revolution will not be financed. The fact that the trainers are embedded in the labor movement is, of course, of critical importance. And this brings me to the last part of the question about the emergence of progressive labor movements that hold the potential for a larger political movement. So in South Africa, our trainer has engaged with mining-affected communities, bringing together labor and other activists not through one-off trainings, but as a continuous political project which combines education with organizing, with the aim of creating a network of working-class climate justice educators, targeting those at the movement so they become better organizers to win over new layers of working class, young people, in the struggle for social and environmental justice. In 2021, our trainer in Trinidad and Tobago, who is from the oil field trade union, was able to mobilize the labor movement to halt the Just Transition Bill, which was basically a green structural adjustment prescription. Political education of members on the environmental crisis was a critical component of this resistance. Since then, we have been working with trade unions for a political program for an alternative industrial policy that is anchored on public ownership of energy as an entry point for broader socio-ecological transformations. Indeed, a lot of inspirations come actually from trade unions from the global south, many of them in mining and oil industries, pushing for a radical shift away from the investor-focused for profit framework and committing to fight for reclaiming energy, to public ownership and control. Under the umbrella of trade unions for transformation, more than 100 trade unions, mainly from the global south, are leading the debate and actions towards a south-led pro-public alternative, where challenging the endless growth and energy expansion that goes with it are central, which is to us what transformative just transition should be about. These developments are all the more inspiring in a context of what Naomi Klein calls it a radical and apocalyptic phase of capitalism, driven by a supremacist elite that no longer believes the world is worth saving. And their vision of the future requires the use of new and emerging technologies, burning the planet harder and faster. While advancing this agenda, they are also building their luxury bunkers and their spaceship to Mars and pushing for more authoritarian regimes. To this hate and apocalyptic vision of this lunatic elite, trade unions in the South are in fact constructing a project of hope by practicing concrete utopias, which, as Bloch reminds us, require both the cold current of analysis, but also a warm stream of desire, passion, and dreaming. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for giving us some insight in your very important work. If I understood you right, you said you had a project with the South African miners.
Patrick actually works very closely with our trainer, Mamet Lesebe, but our intervention is really about providing worker political education. And there is really no money, no project. It's really done, we mean it as a political project of intervening and supporting the labor movement.
Thank you. Because I was raising that question again, because when I remember earlier when we were in the discussion with the panel before, I think you said that this is a really hard group to kind of like engage with when it comes to the question of just transition or good working conditions and also ecological sustainability. But Patrick, you're from the University of Johannesburg. I already said that, and when I think about the labor movement in South Africa, usually I have like in mind a long tradition of unions connecting with other political struggles against the apartheid system, for example. And historically, the labor movement has treated nature as space of outside of work. At the same time, many local self-organized groups address environmental issues, an example opposing extractive mining. and its impacts on land access, water quality, and so on. And in the past, labor activists have thought to integrate environmental concerns into broader environmental agendas. So how are the struggles around labor, climate, and social justice currently unfolding in South Africa? Could you tell us a little bit about the strategy of counterpower and solidarity, if they have proven effective, and what challenges they are actually facing, and what could unions and workers' struggles in the global north actually learn from the experiences you have or you can share with us from the labor movement there in South Africa?
Danke, ja, mein Deutsch ist so einfach, sehr gut, dass wir können auf Englisch, vielen Dank. Und I'm also so impressed that this is such a young crowd. These comrades here are in it for the long haul, but you're much younger than I normally see at Rosa. This is wonderful. The Gen Z movement has come up, especially in Africa, just the last weeks and months. Madagascar, Morocco, in Tunisia and Tanzania, in Zambia, and of course in Kenya. That's the really serious site where the future generations are mobilizing against illegitimate debt that includes climate debt that the West, that the BRICS over-emitters owe to the people who've suffered massive flooding last year that caused a decline in revenues from agriculture and an increase in costs, and therefore new taxes, which created nearly a revolution by Gen Z. And we could even go to Nepal and Indonesia and the Philippines and many other sites now. So thank you for being part of this, those of you, we would say, young lions, roar. And in 1976, they did. 50 years ago, the Soweto youth came up, and they did really what you're saying, Janina. They picked up momentum from anti-apartheid and also a socialist ideology that had emerged from the Durban docks, the dock workers, and then the manufacturing industries in the third city, Durban, in 1973, revived the spirit of liberation. And many of your parents, your grandparents were part of the solidarity that brought one person, one vote in a democratic state. So if I allow just that bigger picture that lets us think from South Africa to the world, before getting back to climate and just transition. Really, there are three movements, aren't there, that you probably all connect to. And one is climate justice. I don't mean climate action. I think we have to now be more serious about distinctions in our principles, our analyses, our strategies, our tactics, our alliances. I'll come to that at the end. Then second, Palestine solidarity. And this is one of the toughest places, isn't it? Within the axis of genocide, stretching from Washington to Ottawa to London to Brussels to Paris and here and beyond. And I would say to the BRICS capitals. And that would include Pretoria. The great strength of our government going to The Hague and saying, stop the genocide in early 2024 is matched by the extreme hypocrisy of the president's brother-in-law. His name is Patrice. He's also on the board of FIFA, the African representative, which won't toss the Israelis out of FIFA. But on Friday, his coal company, African Rainbow Minerals, will have its annual general meeting. And in Johannesburg, we will see quite a good protest against more coal in alliance with Glencore, one of the nastiest companies. It's in Switzerland. But the South African operation is where the greatest capital is, on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. I say that because when we think of militarization, Rheinmetall gets a lot of its bullets from the Denel Rheinmetall, Denel being a state-owned company, factories. They're running 24-hour shifts to produce bullets. And we haven't proven, but we think those not only go to Ukraine, but to Israel. The mercenaries that come from South Africa to Israel are part of this struggle for justice, but particularly coal, because Colombia did put on boycott, divestment sanctions in August this year, and now South Africa is basically the main coal supplier. Well, South Africa supplies coal to Germany, and that's because Scholz came in 2022 after Russia's invasion of Ukraine and said, we want your coal. And at the same time, I need to stress this for Labour, the contradictions of the Just Energy Transition Partnership. Some of you heard Vera this morning talk about this very eloquently. And the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, the import taxes, 29 days from now, will affect South African steel and aluminium, and then petrochemicals, and then automobiles into the EU, and then next year into the UK. These are the contradictions with which a dialectical approach has to grapple with, isn't it? And in a South Africa that's the most unequal country in the world, with the Johannesburg, the most unequal city. And did anybody read the World Economic Forum's competitiveness reports before they ended in COVID times? Right, those have a measure of the class struggle, employer-employee confrontations. And our team, the South African proletariat, would win regularly out of 145 countries as the #1 militant union in the 2010s. Not so much anymore. The class snuggle has replaced the class struggle in some of our leading unions. The other feature that is extraordinary, in addition to corporate inequality, inequality is corporate corruption. PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, an extremely corrupt consultancy, in English I always say that wrong, the consultancy, PwC, they basically rate our corporates and their economic crime and fraud surveys as the best for money laundering, bribery, corruption, cyber fraud. There are about 5 categories. So the conditions under which our working class struggles, by the way, our government under Transparency International, in Moabit, they have a ranking every year of the state, the bureaucratic, the politicians, corruption, and South Africa only ranks 98th most corrupt. So our corporates are #1, yeah, and I know there are many Germans who would like to be more competitive in that ranking too, over here in some of the corporate headquarters. But this is one of the most extraordinary sites for these movements to rise up, especially where they involve the hypocrisies that I've mentioned. The social, the environmental, and the labor movements approach, Janine, to the question you're asking, I think is very fragmented, regrettably. I'd like to say we have a big united front, and we have a sort of sense that we did fighting apartheid, fighting corporates, fighting for socialism. But we don't anymore. So very quickly, I think the fact that we're a sub-imperial capital, meaning lots of immigrants, sometimes from the wars that are military in Mozambique, Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, certainly from our deindustrialization of our region. So immigrants, like here, like anywhere, are common, and so therefore some of our social process now is dedicated to fighting xenophobia. There's an Operation Dadula, sort of AFD, in the making, and we have a Kopanang against xenophobia, a little movement. So we are defeating them on the streets in numbers, but we can see that's going to be a problem. Nevertheless, the social movements and the community groups are extraordinary at times. They've, for example, said the right to energy, the right to electricity in social reproduction. These are women-led struggles for turning on the hot plate for cooking under conditions of patriarchy, instead of setting a fire, getting some coal, kerosene, wood, or coal, paraffin. And that struggle, the Soweto Electricity Crisis Committee, has achieved an 86% illegal reconnection rate in the biggest of the townships. And I think that's one of the moments where we see a technological battleground, where the state supplier of electricity, by the way, it's a context where 65% of the people are under a poverty line of about $3.50 per day. So it's really important to get this generalized access to electricity for free. Now, the question is, can a Soweto Electricity Crisis Committee find alliance with the movements and the environmental justice activists who are public health? They're aware that if you have dirty energy inside your house, maybe we can borrow that one. This one is, maybe it's what I'm saying that is maybe too cheeky for the microphone. The environmental justice movement has a good perspective on household energy, free electricity rather than dirty energy. But that in turn runs them up against the affordability and the extraordinary price rises and the racist way that the electricity companies decided to disconnect people. It's called load reduction. So an effort is being made to try to rehab electricity instead of 88% coming from coal-fired power plants. And again, thanks to German taxpayers, some of that will be lowered because of your contributions to the Just Energy Transition Partnership. But because it is so bound up in neoliberalism, those solutions are being opposed by organized labor. Vera put it actually very well this morning, and describing the undemocratic, top-down, neoliberal and consultant-driven mode in which you're funding JETP, which is basically not a grant, it's a 3% loan. A 3% loan is better than what Eskom, the electricity company, would pay to get funding from the global market, which is about 11%. But it is still a ridiculous process for you to put hard currency into South Africa and expect hard currency when it's really for a just transition where there's very little imported costs. There is, of course, solar panels and things we should be making locally. The CBAM, as the other big controversy, is something that you'll hear more about. Do you know that term of green imperialism, a protectionism by your labor movement working with the government? Now, I do support CBAM if it were designed properly. Again, like JETP, should be part of Germany's climate debt to countries. Senegal, Vietnam, Indonesia are the other sample countries so far. And there should be a climate debt, shouldn't there, by the global north, myself included. And those systems, especially where a CBAM, carbon border adjustment mechanism, allows, through this taxonomy 2 years ago, that green energy includes nuclear and methane gas. So we obviously want to see major changes in all of those. Let me move then very quickly to the final area. Oh, I'll just mention one feature that you'll want to watch. In our courts, we're thinking of rights of future generations. I think the International Court of Justice did that in July. Were you all aware that they finally said something that the German elite never want to hear? Polluter pays on emissions, right, on carbon and methane emissions. Because in the Paris Climate Agreement, the imperial and the sub-imperial alliance, the G7 and the BRICS, were able to write out liability. I think you all know this Paris Climate Agreement is profoundly flawed. I think that's the main reason. Whoever signs it forgives the climate debt. Well, the ICJ, thanks to 27 kids from Vanuatu in a sinking island, have at least been able to reverse that conceptually. And in South Africa, the main struggle to get some of these environmental justice and climate justice aspects into the courts involve a fight against Shell, which is in our top court now, which we think will win. And it's not only the rights of the future generations, part of the narrative of the critics is the rights of past generation, ancestors in the sea. So the cultural rights component, I think, is something from the South African side. Very finally, the common features I think we would see, and especially if the broader global capitalist crisis takes the form of massive over-accumulation. We have, like in China, double the auto productive capacity because Donald Trump reacts to that, and so do many others, with tariffs to, let's say, displace that devaluation or defend against it. South Africa's exports of cars, including Mercedes and BMWs and VWs, to the United States fell 82% in the first half. So this is the terrain I think we're all on, in which IG Metall and anybody in a productive community that's suffering from the displacement of this overaccumulation. I think we were saying for steel, we have about 2 million megatons, but 600 megatons over capacity last year, and this year 680, according to the latest OECD figures. So what Marx thought of as this underlying contradiction in volume 3 of Capital that will always come up is now hitting us all very hard. So my last point is about whether we can turn a term that some of you, especially in the youth, have become familiar with, degrowth, into an awareness that devalorization or devaluation of that over-accumulated capital is now pregnant. It's in fact underway, as I say, vast closures right now of our ArcelorMittal steel factories. And really the last point is whether we can generate from not just a defensive attempt, which all territorial alliances of capital and labor will attempt. Protectionist tariffs, more subsidy. South Africa is doing this. Protectionist tariffs against Chinese dumping is very active right now on steel and tires and washing machines and nuts and bolts. Instead, the visionary trade unions are thinking in an eco-socialist manner about planning this process. So degrowth could be, therefore, something that a devaluation process would bring forth. And one route through to that, I think, is through electricity. And I'll just conclude by saying, first, that the unions to watch are the South African Federation of Trade Unions, which have reformist reforms, if we want to think of Andre Gortz's distinction, which are defensive. But they're also saying we want to renationalize our energy and our iron and steel and make a people's car and put on exchange controls. And they're thinking through non-reformist reform strategies. Among them, I think GOWUSA, the General Industrial Workers Union of South Africa, may be most advanced, partly because of the person who's working at the Global Labour University, Mametwe Sebe. Do we have two last examples at one sentence each? One is defeating apartheid, which, again, all of you had some function in some way, and defeating the idea that corporates can continue to profit from a crime against humanity. That's a politics we've brought to the fossil fuel industry with Divest Invest, and that we bring to Israel through BDS. The second is when corporates are too strong, you can do something to liberate your own politics, and that in South Africa probably, in my experience, was getting AIDS medicines off of intellectual property. And that victory raised life expectancy in South Africa from 52 to 65. And it gave real meaning to the idea you could decommodify, de-stratify. You could get access to 7 million people out of 62 million in the population living with HIV and make the medicines that were once with very high, 10,000 euro per year prices for Glaxo, Wellcome, and Merck. Oh, by the way, we tried that with vaccines for COVID, but Angela Merkel stood in the way of that for BioNTech's purposes. So we do know two words from these experiences that we can say even in a fragmented state that we're in now. And 9 days ago when Donald Trump didn't come to the G20, and when I thought of what I learned in the G20 in 2017 in Hamburg, some of you were there. Hamburg was the hottest spot on earth in June 2017. Wow, did we learn struggles against your Polizei. But what we can bring you are in these memories and in these moments of resistance, the two words that everyone must know when you come to South Africa. The two words are amandla, aware to. They mean power to the people. Amandla, away to.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick, for building different bridges to all your remarks you already did. I now want to give all of you the opportunity to make your remarks, ask your questions. I will try to do a gendered speakers list, but if I kind of oversee someone, just tell me, help me with that. So we have one first question over here. Someone here with the microphone? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me? Okay. I thought this could be a good time to post something that's been on my mind for quite a while. And please bear with me. I'm putting myself in a bit of an uncomfortable position, and I try to be brief as much as I can. And I try to formulate it as constructive criticism and maybe like an invitation. I don't think I could sleep otherwise if I don't say this. And I don't want to appear as like I'm biting the hand that feeds me. I'm sitting here in an Austrian grand. But I think I would maybe like to invite all of us to sort of critically reflect on the role of core economies and, I don't know, however you want to label it, in this like big picture and conjuncture. And I think it's also worth saying that Germany plays a huge role in all of this. So I think I would like to put this on the table maybe. And I will pick out maybe 3 points. I try to be very brief. I think yesterday we talked a bit about this like unfinished macro-financial structure of the EU and the Maastricht Treaty and all of that. I think it merits saying this didn't fall from the sky. This was largely imposed by Germany and other economies, and this has like determined the shape of the EU and dependencies for the longest time. And now that model Deutschland is running out of steam, which obviously has implications in Germany, I'm not denying that, but it also has implications beyond Germany. So now there's a desire to change these regulations that were put in place mostly by Germany, you know, all the Sondervermögen, whether you can finance corporations, state subsidies, and all of these, I'm sure you're all aware. But it's also coming out of the sense that, okay, climate politics, state-led, have failed, but also because, yeah, model Deutschland is running out of steam, so there's a self-interest in there. And maybe a second point that I can tie to that previously, in the past years, if these rules have been relaxed, say under COVID, say under the energy crisis, or like when prices were going up, usually these like extra, whatever, these exceptional measures have also served, for instance, Germany or France, that were supposed to go to like relaxing industrial prices to save industry. But France and Germany are no longer the most industrialized countries in the EU. So that's another thing to say, and like a very concrete example that we talk a lot about, right? If the automotive industry, and I will exaggerate, like goes down in Germany, I am not denying that that has a huge impact for these individual plants and the workers there and the regions in which they are. And yeah, of course that's a loss, and if it's like not converted into something, it's a loss, but I think it bears keeping in mind that it also means, and I'm again exaggerating a bit, but Poland and like Slovakia and Hungary will go down with that because they are independent positions in the same value chains, because like a lot of it was externalized and outsourced to these countries that are the cheap labor force of the auto industry. So I think this bears like keeping in mind. And I think, yeah, and I'm really glad that you spoke to the experience in like South Africa, and I sat in a Chilean panel, and then also another one on like post-coal landscapes and workers and subjectivities, mostly in East Germany. And I was really happy to be in these spaces because there's so many structural similarities that I think we are all sitting in this room, like we need to pull these out and learn from one another on this. Because yes, of course, like context and whatever, all of these histories matter, but like we all know how capital functions, and there are these structural similarities where we need to learn from each other, I feel. And then I'm just wondering why these things are not being pulled into the room. Is it because there's not, again, I'm exaggerating, many of us that would bring in these topics? I don't think that's the case, and I would hope to think that there's willingness to engage with this. And the other thing I will maybe say and kind of end on this, but we've been discussing how difficult it is to carry out socio-ecological transformation largely in core contexts. Then how difficult it is to do the same thing from a dependent position. I think we really need to be discussing this as well, and I hope this comes across as like more constructive and less angry. And I'm aware that I'm a little bit annoyed that I'm clamping my anger down. But yeah, I would like to invite us to think about this for like a next conference or now or all of this, because yeah, this is the hill I will die on, and I think I had to say it here, so thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, could you pass it behind you? Yeah.
Hello, my name is Dragan. I would like to thank the last speaker for mentioning genocide in Gaza. I felt that that was a topic kind of that was lacking from official panels and sessions in the past 2 days, and in relation to that, would like to pose a question to the two representatives of the unions, German unions. So what I'm interested in is considering the role of the German arms industry and of German state in the genocide of Gaza, whether you had some actions as unions, collective actions, to address that role, to counter it, whether you tried, whether you encountered some obstacles in relation to the state or to Rheinmetall or other companies? That's first question. And second question, considering what we were witnessing this summer, the role of, for instance, Spanish and some Italian unions in supporting flotilla that was going to Gaza, did you have any contact with those unions? Did you try to establish them, or whether you see some potential for this kind of international action? Thank you.
Thank you. Is it okay if I collect one other question? Are you fine with that? Another question? Fine. You raised your hand, right?
Hello. I have a question to Hans-Jürgen, but first I would like to hear an answer on the other question. You mentioned the steel industry as a good field for cooperation between trade unions and environmentalists. And I took two things from this conference, that in some cases we should talk again about socialization of factories, especially if a lot of state money is going to be put in the factories to save them, which will happen at steel, I think so. And the other one is that, well, or three things, of course. Then there is a need of green steel, a definite need of green steel. And the third thing is that we learned from Austria that good railway planning is also kind of an industrial policy. And if we would have a better planning on and more money, more funds put into the railway system, we would have need for more steel. So what do you think about bringing all these aspects together for having a joint campaign of trade unions, different trade unions and environmental organizations and maybe other social movements?
Do you hear me now? Yeah. Can we take another question? And I was just reminded, please, if you could take your names or say your names so we can kind of respond to you. I forgot that. I'm sorry.
Thank you. My name is Matthew. I'm from the Just Transition Partnership in Scotland, which is a partnership of trade unions and environmental climate organisations. So I want to thank the Rosa-Luxemburg. My question really is to Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung. I want to thank you very much for the incredibly interesting discussions I've been part of, and I don't want to sound ungrateful, but in a conference on labour environmentalism, which is about, in my view, trade unions and climate movement, I thought that I would be speaking to lots of other people who are trade unionists and climate activists, because I'm both. And I love you all, but I don't think, that's not how I identify you, mostly. And so, like, that sense of having a discussion about these alliances when they're not really here leads me to ask this question, not in a destructive way at all, because I found it incredibly interesting, and I don't want to sort of be overcritical, but my question, therefore, to the Stiftung is, since we have, as you were, unearthed or presented all these very important and challenging discussions and debates, what can you do to take them into those movements? And what can you do in so doing to bring those two movements together? Thank you.
Thank you. I would give back to the panel. I would start with, are you happy to start, Julia? Then we can start in this direction, or do you want to start? Or you want to start?
I think there was no question to me, so I would try to not talk too much, because I think there's so much ideas and questions, comments in the room.
Of course, it depends if you want to like respond for the general remarks, but it's fine if you.
I could say one thing because I once organized regarding the situation and the Gaza topic in Germany. I mean, I'm a trade union member, I'm a scholar, and that's it. So I cannot talk as the Stiftung or whatever. I just wanted to tell everyone who's not from Germany a bit about the situation. On one example, I once organized an exchange from harbor workers, mostly, or some harbor workers and other workers, to Genova some years ago, and there some harbor workers from Hamburg met the Kalb workers who now initiated that flotilla movement, and yeah, you are all informed maybe. And there was one harbor worker from Hamburg now trying to go to that meeting in Genova, and we had some contact, and he only was, like, the trade union only heard of him going there, and it was really for him already a high risk to only let his colleagues and also the trade union representatives know he was there on the meeting discussing whether he or his colleagues would join. So he started somehow privately to bring that movement back home, to only discuss whether it could make sense to be part of it or no. And this is where this kind of connection to German harbors stopped. So yeah, I mean, this is one example. You will probably all be aware, but this is how small, like one person tried, and I think the movement did not come here. And otherwise, yeah, I don't know. I think your comment was clear, and some people, I think, also in this room tried to also do stuff at universities, but also there, it's everyone is thinking probably about his or her job. So it's really, the situation is very dark. But thanks for mentioning also from your side and from your side. I mean, it wasn't the topic of the conference, but I think we cannot talk about it enough. So thank you.
Yeah, the question on Germany, well, we're not, most of us, not simply Germans, but lefties in Germany, so I think we have no problem with your criticism on German politics at all. We share it. The bad politics of German governments, several German governments, led to a bloc transformation and a fascization, very close connected both in Germany and most of the European Union countries. So the end of the model, of the German export model, that's not ended yet, but it's coming to what you're saying, going out of breath or something like that. That maybe, or we perceive it, we hope for that, that's an opening for more radical ideas of a socialist or even eco-socialist transformation, as the incremental mode of eco-modernization does not work anymore. So maybe this is an incentive for not so radical progressive forces to try a little more. We're working on that, and that's I can invite you to an even bigger conference, I hope, on green socialism next year in this building. And as a party, we also try to focus on that. We will have a new program. We are starting yet in January with the work on the new program, and all this stuff is center of that new program. And of course, where are the unionists? I can't speak for this conference because I didn't organize it, but the foundation has a regular union conference, the last one with 3,500 unionists, not in this building because it's too small, but in Technical University here in Berlin. And in 2 years we will have another one. So it is a duty to bring these debates together, but we have several projects writing this project, like I mentioned in Osnabrück, very concrete ones, but also regular circles of discussion with workers' associations, unionists, climate activists, critical science, and things like that on several projects. And we try to do studies, but also engage in concrete campaigns such as Wir fahren zusammen and others. So yeah, that's of course is a very important point. And just a word on Gaza. You already talked about it. I'm not always sure if it should be mentioned at every place, but to say the Rosa-Luxemburg Foundation is a point where we do a lot about it. We have an office in Ramallah, if you know. We have another one in Tel Aviv, working close together. And of course, it's a big debate also here. And the party organized a huge demonstration in September on Gaza. It was not an easy task, if you know how anti-Semitism in Germany is working. So the left is always under attack from bourgeois society, from the government, from police and things like that. But the party has taken a clear stance against genocide in Gaza. So I think we're doing the best we can in this difficult situation, especially in Germany. As you know, of historical reasons, there's a special connection to Israel. But Israel is not a proto or real fascist Israeli government, so we have to differentiate between the two things a lot.
Thank you, Mario. I'm not sure if we're clapping. Hans-Jürgen.
A lot of questions to me. So, first of all, I agree to Mario. To criticize the German government and the German policy is quite good, and I agree to that. And there's no doubt that the Germany and the German government had been the most powerful neoliberal force in Europe in the last decades, and we as a union may be not loud enough, but criticize that too. And now we see that the neoliberal model and the monetaristic euro regime doesn't work very well. And now every country, the German too, try to escape from the consequences from this. And this is one of the struggle we are in today. And to criticize it, I'm on your side. And the unions, most of them too. The Gaza question for the German unions and for the German left wing is really a complicated problem. And honestly spoken, we have not a common position in the unions in Germany. There are a lot of colleagues that fear that they will get into the trap of anti-Semitism if they criticize the Israeli government too loud. And they try to make a difference between the government and the people in Israel. And I think that aspect is totally right. But there are some other peoples, and I belong to them, who have the opinion that we are forced to be louder in the critique of the imperialist and colonialist policy of Israel and the government. Of course, we have to be careful, to support several anti-Semitic strategies that are also in the world, and we don't want to work with them. But it should not hinder us to be clear in qualifying the Israeli policy and its crime against humanity and its imperialist policy against the people in Palestine. For me, it's no doubt about that. There was another question, I forgot it, sorry. Stahl, oh. Yes. So we have so many fancy ideas what can be the future of the steel industry in Germany, but we miss the power to realize it. And we should not underestimate one thing. The way in a capitalistic economy, from a company, from the gray to the green products, is a way that has to go through a period of no or low profit. You are not able to earn so much money with green products as you were able to do with the grey one. As you all know, in a capitalistic market, it's a problem for a company if they earn too long, too less. If the profit rate too long is under the average of the profit rate in the sector, the market kicks you out of the play, of the game. And that is one of the problem we have. To find a good solution, we need some preconditions. We need an intensive system of political intervention in this economy. We need support with common money. We need time in the companies to go into the green future with a period where there's no profit rate or only a low one. And we miss those preconditions and those political help. And because of that, only try to find some products that are not able to be sold on the global market would lead, that's the fear of my colleagues, would lead in losing many jobs, losing the incomes and losing the social perspective for the employees. And it's easy to say, to come out, but it's really not that easy to do. And we are all looking for strategies that try to find some ways without losing the green objective. And maybe the concepts, the strategies we have developed are not aggressive and not offensive enough. But we have more strategies than we are able to realize. And if you don't discuss that contradiction and this, as I said in my introduction, this situation of double risk for our employees, we will not be able to create a stable and a good acting alliance. And because of that, I think we have to have the debates on these problems in the steel industry, in the automotive industry, and in others. And if you take into concern the global problems and the politics of tariffs, and to try to combine green issues with economic tariffs, it makes the problem more complex. And you're right. And because of that, one of my answers is we have to have an honest debate on that. And in my opinion, conferences like that are pretty good opportunities to do so. And thank you for that, for your questions.
Thank you for these excellent questions. And we have a couple more minutes for just a few very short questions. I see you, Jenny. The microphone is over there.
Thank you. I want first to encourage Julia to elaborate a bit on the GKN case. We skipped that earlier. The second question I have is what you just said, Hans-Jürgen, is it's kind of coming from the perspective that we fight these struggles in a situation of international competition. And if we fight our fights in this national boxes, do we not somehow reproduce the problems coming with that? And the colleagues earlier mentioned, of course, the problem of post-colonial structures, and our struggles are situated in a context of racial capitalism and so forth. But don't we have to kind of think more transnationally if we think about questions related to labor environmentalism? And perhaps you could elaborate a bit on what your cases and expertise says on that. Thanks.
We have one in the back.
Yeah, hi, I'm Felix, and my question is also to Hans. So you said that the IG Metall is doing a lot okay, basically, I want to make it short. My question is, why is the IG Metall, in the case of Osnabrück, so far, so quiet? You say you do a lot with climate activists in the past. You did a lot with Fridays, you said, concrete projects. Here you would have an option for a concrete project. So far, the only people that reach out the hand are climate activists. And my question would be, why aren't you reaching out the hand in the opposite direction right now? Why aren't you encouraging the section in Niedersachsen with Thorsten Kröger and so on to sit together and basically form solutions? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We have one here in the front, and then you're the one with the last question, the last two questions.
Yeah, also a question to Hans-Jürgen, just to continue with the questions to you. You're invited to the controversy, and now we take on the invitation. I think we have to distinguish between the role of trade unions in collective negotiation processes and the political mandate of trade unions. I think what I observe is that the IG Metall often focuses on its role on the collective negotiation processes. I have this conflict with VW 1 year ago in mind. That was a hard conflict, but I wondered why the IG Metall did not take on its political mandate, demand a complete transition to a renewable transport and a sustainable transport system, and thereby also strengthen its own role in the collective negotiation process. It didn't do so. I often read your text, Hans-Jürgen, and I'm really enthusiastic, and I already reconciled with the IG Metall after having read your text, and then when I see the practical policies, I often, I'm a bit overwhelmed by despair, and I think, how can we get out of this contradiction? Many of the speakers in the panels talked about public ownership, about public control of infrastructures, of crucial enterprise, and so on. I think that could be a strategy, and if the IG Metall, for example, took this center stage and would say, okay, that is one idea to push for, in alliance with other trade unions and in alliance with social movements, to demand public ownership, to demand today in the first panel or in a workshop in the morning we learned by Hans-Jürgen about the socialization of the investment function. It's not even Marx, it's Keynes. So it could be a reformist project, but it could be a reformist project that would open the door to a more revolutionary perspective in the direction of a, I wouldn't dare to say green socialism, but something like that on the way to it. Okay, that would be my question.
Thank you. There's the last question.
Hi, my name is Sören Stoecker. I'm a teacher from Berlin. And thank you, first of all, for the wonderful contributions on the panel. The first part is a statement. I think it's a factual one. So I think the planet as we know will not survive if we don't overcome capitalism. And from my point of view, we will not overcome it without a revolutionary party. I think Rosa-Luxemburg would agree on that part as well. This leads me to a question to Patrick. So a few years ago, I delved into the story of South Africa and NUMSA, the metalworkers union. So there was an initiative for just transition project to overcome energy poverty and like a complete overhaul of the economy towards renewable energies. And as far as I'm concerned, it was like a rather isolated initiative from a left part of the union bureaucracy. But there was also even the initiative to create a new political party, revolutionary party. And maybe you could talk us a little bit through what happened afterwards. So is nothing at all left of it? What has come sort of the bits and pieces of what is left of it. Did other people take it up on the rank and file level? So, and I think there's much more to talk about, but I want to keep it short, so that's it.
Thank you for being so precise. So, just one last question, because you were so on point with your question. One last question here in front, Nora.
Yeah, I was hesitant to say something because I talked so much yesterday, but I have to. So I want to say that very, very shortly, my experience with workers on the shop floor level and asking them how they want to live, they want to live in a more simple way. So you're struggling with what can we do so we have the same jobs in the same way, on the same level. I think it would be useful to be more radical and go more to the center of how people want to live and find out that they have alternative ideas, which could be a solution to the idea of green growth, and take those seriously and put that into the politics.
Thank you. That was very brief. Okay, thanks a lot for the many diverse and critical questions as well. I think this makes the debate very lively. I would love for you to start from this way around and answer the questions that were directed to you or the remarks you want to make to the questions. And also, because it's like the final round, I would like for you to kind of like give us a perspective of how do we move forward now. And make it as quick as possible. Thank you.
We can, because we cannot air the dirty laundry of South African left politics when we're live streaming, dear comrade Soldier. I think if you allow me to say, one classic idea has been a vanguard party and a big trade union, the biggest, the metal workers, 350,000 at their peak, much less now because of the deindustrialization. They chose the Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party vehicle as a vanguard, and they didn't promote what others in this same movement, the leader, Zwelinzima Vavi, of the South African Federation of Trade Unions, which NUMSA is a part of, said, no, this has to be a bottom-up workers, mass workers' party. That actually is such a classic problem, and now SRWP sort of exists, but it didn't even get 25,000 votes necessary to have its first seat when it tried in the mid-2010s. Now, the main lesson I take is something, since we're live streaming and we don't want to go on the record, but there are some problems with funding. So I will just mention a name that's well known, and then I'll mention the alternative to conclude. The name that's well known is Roy Singham, who has many fingers in many pots in the sub-imperial countries, Brazil, South Africa, India. And that, I think, is actually part of the story. It's well known if you find it on the left, the question of how did this SRWP, but even more profoundly, how did a trade union that was so strong on eco-socialism now get to the point where it is defending coal mining, and won't stop the coal that's coming from its own mines going to Israel. That's the same union. And the alternative, to conclude, is actually called Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung for Southern Africa. And in Johannesburg, we will have smaller versions, but these same kinds of united front building processes. If it wasn't for Rosa, in Johannesburg, we would be much impoverished in our struggles for a genuine just transition, for climate justice, for socialism. And if it wasn't for Marcus und auch Tobias, Jenny und die andere, so vielen Dank. It's so wonderful that I can come to a place like this and feel so inspired and energized by all of you, dear comrades. Amanda, away too.
Yeah, I just want to pick up a bit on the question of competitiveness. In the research work and really action research work we've been doing with Trinidad and Tobago about constructing an alternative to the government just green structural programs. That's been a major blockage, actually, the question of competitiveness. Because if Trinidad and Tobago, a country heavily dependent on oil, is to transition to some other form, that becomes a question. The question of competitiveness has been articulated again and again, even among progressive scholars. And I think it's just stunning how our own imagination has been colonized by this very concept. So we somehow need to unlearn things that have been so ingrained into us in terms of how do we look forward, because we're just lacking that sort of imagination. So the way that we are thinking in Trinidad and Tobago was to at least start thinking, instead of just Trinidad, actually a core group of countries coming together to build capacities that would allow them to transition somehow away from fossil fuels. And it is difficult, and I think the learning process for us has been how also poisoned the concept of public has become, often equalized with state ownership, and of course with problems with hierarchical structures, unresponsive, bureaucratic, and so on. But the real struggle is, how do we bring the public back into the publicness? How do we actually think about a model of public ownership where the communities and the workers and their organizations have a meaningful say into how these services are actually organized? So I think just by having these conversations and comradely conversations where we disagree becomes very important. And in that sense, I suppose every such framing such as this conference is important to actually think forward how we move. But definitely what we understand in the case of Trinidad and Tobago is that unless we start thinking about collaboration instead of and cooperation instead of competitiveness, we are going to be locked into this system. Thank you.
Thank you. I would go over to you.
Yes, maybe two remarks to the questions for me. When I said that it's not the general strategy of IG Metall to try to replace the jobs we lost in the automotive industry, to replace it in the defense industry or the weapon, the arm production industry, I did not say that we are able to make it never happen anywhere. But I beg you, please, don't overestimate Osnabrück. We lost 100,000 jobs in the last year. And maybe we have Osnabrück, we have an example in Sachsen, we have Conti, we have maybe, as I know, 4 or 5 examples where we have that problem. And maybe you're right, the colleagues are not loud enough. Maybe. I think they are not as silent as you mentioned. But 4 examples in a period of a deindustrialization of an economy. Degrowth in the industry sector in Germany is not a demand, it's an empirical fact. So, and in this situation, we have to be close to the colleagues that try to find new jobs. As unions, we say, don't give your hope to militarization for the reasons I told and for the reasons I said. But when the colleagues say, what's the alternative? IG Metall, please give me another way. Maybe we can say we have a lot of demands, for example, for socializing the steel or the automotive industry. But in the current situation, we are socializing for its own, it's in maximum a small element of the solution. We have banks in public ownership in the financial crisis, and they did exactly the same as the private banks. And we know it's not enough to change the players, you have also to change the rules of the game. And this is one of the problems. To go forward in one piece, sometimes it ends in a catastrophe. So we have to develop the strategies, and we have to combine the actors that are able to be active in the economy, in their own companies, in politics and society and so on. And only if we are able to combine those actors and their action, we are able to find solutions for the situation, for example, for the colleagues in one or in two companies. And all parts of the left should be participated to the, should participate to this try to develop an whole concept, because every alone will not be able to do that. So, and I argue not to stop the research on this. I'm a researcher too. And of course I will look at every example and I try to find some ways to learn from that, what to do to put that example into a whole strategy. But if I look at the research of mine and my colleagues, we were not really successful in doing that. And for that, it's not an excuse what I try to do, but I try to explain why in some situations this acting of the unions and the colleagues is so far away from what we wish as left-wing scientists and left-wing actors. And so please go inside this debate, participate on that. That's the reason why I'm here. That's the reason why I wrote my books and my articles. But I'm one of 2 million in the IG Metall, and we have to have this debate. We have some optimistic feelings when we participate on the Congress of Industry All Global 2 weeks ago in Sydney, and we recognize that there are a lot of different problems from the colleagues from the Global South, but we recognize there are also a lot of common problems. And we had a debate how to combine the strategies from the Global North and the Global South. And this was really inspiring debates, and maybe these are some pieces we should put up and make it to a strategy in the South, or especially to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Julia, you want to continue?
Okay, thank you also from my side for organizing this great conference. I think it's really, I don't know how many sociologists or whatever scholars are sitting here, but it's not so usual to be on a scientific conference where it's so wished and okay to also talk so much about politics and show that we are really willing to search for a strategy as well. I think, it's a really great room which you created here. And regarding also the question why not so many workers or climate activists are sitting here, and the question what we do with IG Metall and metal workers, I would be really in favor of somehow seeing whether we could combine forces, scientific forces, power in some companies maybe, and maybe some coalitions between Verdi and IG Metall, as it was some decades ago when IG Metall, Naturfreunde and Verdi and all those different actors came together to develop strategies. And I think what we can learn from Wir fahren zusammen, for example, was that if we have a concrete proposal, for example, let's bring, I don't know, some very good organizers to one VW factory, let's bring the climate activists who would support, let's bring some scientists who could develop, as in at GKN, this kind of concrete utopian plans which could maybe show, okay, this is a vision where a region could struggle for together, and this would be not an eco-modernist but a real global perspective plan, as they also did in at GKN. I don't know, this is something I would really appreciate, and I think maybe we could even combine, I don't know how IG Metall works in detail, but I think there could be even some money in bigger organizations which could say, okay, let's focus on one or two struggles and try to develop something which could also inspire other workforces, because as we all discussed, if there is no vision and no vision which could show that also struggling for other perspectives than war and weapons industry, for example, I think it will be very difficult to win people for something like that. Yeah, and maybe that would be one learning from GKN. This whole story there cannot be explained without the radical workplace organizing they did before. So they had assemblies on a weekly basis. They had cold and warm stream elements because they were playing soccer together, wearing GKN t-shirts even before the closure. So there was a collective of, in the end, I don't know, I would say 200 active workers, which was able to mobilize 40,000 people on one demonstration and big parts of Italy. So it is possible to change consciousness also via very little minority of society actually. So yeah, I think we have to somehow find possibilities to organize the workplaces in a very democratic way, and then we could maybe also see some bigger movements after a while. I mean, yeah, this is maybe this concrete utopian planning and the workplace organizing. I think those are the things we do need, maybe.
Yeah, debates on the shop floor were easier some years ago for us, from outside, let's say. Maybe not more successful, but easier. So one, not excuse, but maybe explanation why it's so difficult with unions on the shop floor. We as RLS, and even with our members from work councils and representatives from other factories, even inside Volkswagen, were perceived in Osnabrück as outsiders. Osnabrück is, of course, just a case, not overestimate, I'm sure, but it's a case. And we're seen as outsiders, not as help, but increasing the pressure. They perceived our suggestions as risky, unsafe, even increasing fear, so they were closing ranks because of the pressure from company, from the debates around militarization, and then all these lefties coming also. So they are under huge pressure. And we had people inside the factory, but not a critical mass, maybe not enough key persons to widen the debate inside the factory. But we felt this urgency because of Rheinmetall was so fast, and so we had to do something, but maybe it was too early. We didn't organize really that intervention in a way it should have been done. So what is to be done? We are thinking still about a kind of inside-outside strategy, maybe with a little help from Hansi, I don't know. Because, again, our motto was always against the corporations, the big ones, but always with the workers. Otherwise, you can't have this transformation. So let's continue this debate. Let's hopefully with the end of this Rheinmetall offer, maybe there's an opening also in this region to have a debate about different understanding and alternatives. But let's continue and even force a little bit on IG Metall, because some people, Hans-Jürgen and others, like that, and they need it, and we need our critique too, and not to get into an utopia that's not based in real circumstances. And the second very short point, our vision, let's say. Well, fascisation, not only in Germany, but also here, brings polarization, and that brings a space for more radical left class organization and socialist perspectives, as we are seeing with the reinvention of the left party right now, with winning cities like New York with Mandami, who took Manhattan, and next year we take Berlin. And then beyond that. So it's a bad time, but maybe not that bad for real radical politics. So let's continue.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you, everyone, for this very exciting, excellent panel. I'm really happy that I was able to moderate it. Before you all leave, just give us 5 more minutes, because you can go if you want to. I would like to give over to Markus, because he wants to say a few words before we all leave and go our own ways.